One thing I realise as I get older is that my taste in things like music, movies, video games change quite drastically, and have changed quite drastically since I was 14 years old, say. And while that's true for everyone on the planet more or less, once in a while, for me at least, can't speak for everyone else, something happens that more or less instantly changes my mind on something like a certain song, a certain movie, or a certain video game. If you watched my Splinter Cell video a few months back, you would have heard me say that I didn't care much for Double Agent, Conviction and Blacklist, as they didn't feel like Splinter Cell, like they stepped too far away from the series. And that was based purely on YouTube videos, watching cutscenes and Let's Plays, and an opinion of a friend of mine who just really didn't like one of these games specifically. After I made that video, I went back and I started watching a few Let's Plays on Double Agent and Conviction. I watched some of the cutscenes online. Conviction I ended up watching all the way through because I came to the conclusion that I don't care enough about this game to play it, and just consuming the cutscenes would be enough for me. Double Agent I turned off after maybe the first 2 cutscenes because I realised that this is a game I'm potentially going to play sometime off in the distant future. But Splinter Cell Blacklist, that made one fatal mistake. It went on sale. And after buying it and playing through it twice back to back, I came to the conclusion that this game isn't amazing, but it's a lot better than people have previously told me, and what some people on the internet would have you believe. But we'll come back to my opinion in a little bit. Let's go through the history of the game. Releasing August 20th, 2013, Splinter Cell Blacklist was met with a lot of praise from critics, but fans were a lot more hesitant to speak kindly of this game at first. The days after its release saw a lot of vitriol and hate towards specific choices that Ubisoft Toronto chose, with the biggest blow the series could take also being the most noticeable and upfront, the loss of Michael Ironside as Sam Fisher. Now, there are a couple of reasons as to why Michael would not reprise his role as Sam Fisher in Blacklist, and the most important one would be the fact that, unfortunately around this time, Michael was struggling with cancer, throat cancer more specifically, so he was battling that and wouldn't have an opportunity to reprise his role, let alone potentially put in the performance. That, and around this time, as is the case with a lot of games now, performance capture was used for the cutscenes so they could make the movements more realistic, and a 63-year-old Michael Ironside likely wouldn't have been up to the challenge of performing so physically. The new voice actor, Eric Johnson, was not well received at all by Splinter Cell fans back in 2013, and Splinter Cell fans now, more specifically by me. Johnson's performance of Fisher was lackluster at best and insultingly cringe at its worst. Sometimes the performance is decent enough and passable. Other times he sounds like one of those fake-ass TikTokers pretending to be corpse husband.
So, I just want to thank everyone who came out to the live stream. So, for anyone asking why my voice sounds like this, my grandpa has a very similar voice to me, or he did when he was younger.
And this leads to my biggest complaint of the game, one that I'm tackling straight out of the gate because it is the most forefront issue. But this is not Sam Fisher. This is a pretender to the Fisher throne. Sam Fisher was always cool, calm, collected. He had this aura about him, this presence that, you know, if you ever crossed him, it was likely going to be the last mistake you ever made. But he always had time for a cheeky one-liner, he always had time for a joke, some banter amongst his comrades. He very rarely acted on emotion, which in his line of work is extremely hard. But in Splinter Cell Blacklist, Sam Fisher is literally pissed off all the time for no reason. I mean, sure, his friend got badly hurt at the beginning of the game, but that's happened before to him in the series. And I think in the entire time I played this game, over 3 playthroughs, I only picked up on what was potentially a joke once. And I really struggle to use the word joke there. A spoiler alert for Double Agent and Conviction, but the whole reason Sam was pissed off in those games is because he was led to believe that his daughter had died at the hand of some arms dealer. Then it was ultimately revealed that Sam's daughter's death was staged just to manipulate him. And she's alive and well. She's back home. In Blacklist, Sam can stop and talk to her in between missions, knowing that she's safe and getting her opinions on the events as they are portrayed in the news. It's years later. The people who manipulated Sam aren't on the scene anymore. Sam runs 4th echelon. Sam's life, for the most part, is back where it was, in and around Chaos Theory. So Sam being this moody, argumentative spaffburger for really no reason rubs me the wrong way. And Eric Johnson's mixed voice acting really doesn't help because the emotional scenes don't hit like they would. The scenes where they're meant to be having civil conversation sounds like he's actively threatening them. Now we do have one major win in the voice acting department though, and that's the fact we've got Elias Tufexis back. Somehow they wrote him in to play Kobin. I would just like to point out though that when I was watching through the Conviction storyline, I did not catch on that Kobin was played by Tufexis back then, so my surprise here is completely unfounded. The arms dealer who had a hand in faking Sam's daughter's death, who has gone on to become the best character in the series, aside from old Sam with Michael Ironside acting. Although it is weird him not being moody all the time and actually like laughing and cracking jokes. It just makes me happy, I don't know how to explain it. The gameplay is where Blacklist really shines though, and brings out some of the better stealth mechanics seen in the series since Chaos Theory. It removes a few elements, but adds new ones in their place that work for the most part. And despite the fact that he is meant to be 55, Sam is a nimble and acrobatic senior citizen. Climbing from poles, hanging from ledges, rock climbing. You combine this movement with the voice actor and ugly-ass character model, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Sam's in his mid-30s, early 40s at latest. Instead of how hidden you are being determined by how dark the shadows are and how deep Sam is in them, you're only ever simply in two states, hidden or not, with the only factor affecting this being the op suit you're wearing. Which, in the early game means, even if you are still standing in pitch black, there is a good chance guards will see you. But it's nice to see that stealth is being prioritised again, with Ghost Run netting you the highest scores and highest payouts, Combat being the lowest, and Panther being a nice middle ground. But you can tell the combat was something Ubisoft Toronto was really proud of, as the sheer number of weapons, tools and gadgets you have available to you is quite shocking for a Splinter Cell game. Long gone are the days where Sam had one rifle and would flip between configurations of it for things like shotgun, sniper rifle or a launcher. Now Sam can strap any flavour of heat he wants to his back, but by the midpoint of the game you're likely going to be using the SCIS pistol and the SC4000 rifle, as these are, when maxed out with the appropriate upgrades, the best weapons in the game, even counting later unlocks through the black market. And you can get these relatively early on within the first few missions if you forego other upgrades like the plane upgrades or your suit upgrades or unlocking gadgets. The only real complaint I have with the game's combat is that the cover mechanic can get a bit too sticky sometimes, and the fact that when aiming, the camera pulls in way too close. This makes close range gunfights against moving enemies almost a death wish. And much like how early op suits don't really help much in terms of stealth, early weapons, especially without any accuracy upgrades, make landing precise shots a crapshoot. Kind of like back in Splinter Cell 1, you can never really tell if you're going to get a headshot or not, as a pull of the trigger could mean your bullet lands in someone's ear or will fly off over their head. Even though each weapon can be set up for accuracy, power or control, I always went for maximum accuracy each and every time, just so I don't have to reload or save as much from missed gunshots getting me spotted or killed in a gunfight I wasn't ready for. But just in case you don't want to take any chances, you always have the option of sneaking up behind someone and just straight up murdering them that way. Because again, stealth is a real winner here. It's just so satisfying going cover to cover, in and out of shadows, through vents, just sneaking up on a guy who's just clearly trying to do his job on his evening patrol and drive a karambit into his kidney. Because as you may have noticed from the gameplay on display, unlike Deus Ex where I chose non-lethality, in Blacklist I went all in and chose to play mostly Panther style. The mark and execute mechanic returns from previous Splinter Cell games, but I never really found myself using it outside of a small handful of times. And even then, I only ever used it on maybe 2 guards at a time who had stopped for a chat. As far as I'm aware, there's no opportunity to use it with the stun gun or non-lethal rounds, so the only time you're ever going to use this is if you are going for a Panther run, or you're in active combat and just need to mow out 2 people who have just broke from cover. The other big praise I can heap on this game is the characterization of everyone else above the Paladin aside from Sam. Anna Grimm's daughter joins Sam once again, but we are now also joined by Charlie Cole, an expert techie hacker that Sam picked up in the first mission of the game, and he's also the main source of comic relief when Coben isn't around. We also have Isaac Briggs, who was brought on board via recommendation from Anna Grimm's daughter and secondary Splinter Cell agent, lending Sam a hand in most missions out on the field. And of course, best boy himself, Coben.
Thank you. Thank you. Who are you? CIA? Oh, you have got to be fucking shitting me!
World-renowned illegal arms dealer and someone who had a hand in helping to fake Sam's daughter's death. He's now an impromptu ally after Sam saves him from the Middle East and a torture scene in a police station. This is the ragtag team that are tasked by the President of the United States to stop a terrorist group called the Engineers from carrying out what are known as the Blacklist attacks. Several terrorist acts on America targeting infrastructure and industry that are vital to the American public, all in a bid to have the President recall all troops that are abroad back to the States, because the leader of the Engineers isn't a fan of how America polices the world. We are then sent around the world to stop the Blacklist attacks to varying degrees of success, and also to hunt down the leader of the Engineers, Majid Sadiq. And I have to say, Blacklist actually sports some really good level design, with levels I'd say that go on to rival something like Splinter Cell 1 and 2 in terms of complexity. With the short and sweet private estate in Paraguay to the miserable and rainy London Mill, and the final mission which has you breaking into an underground presidential bunker designed to withstand nuclear strikes. And while you have a lot of options usually to move around the environment, even the small handful of locations that don't always have a viable stealth route or plenty of cover for the more trigger happy amongst you. There are also a handful of side missions you can play through to put a little bit of extra cash in your wallet. Grimm's daughter's missions are pure stealth, having you sneak around an environment, placing bugs and trackers in different kinds of tech. Coben has you go into an area and take out a group of hostiles, with the choice of it being stealthy or not entirely up to you, with the louder option usually drawing reinforcements, so if you're in a very bad mood that morning, it's good stress relief. And Charlie has a horde mode in a Splinter Cell game, which I care very little for. In fact, the footage you're seeing right here is me blasting through one of them as quickly as possible and exiting at my earliest convenience. Now, the combat's fun enough that this should be an enjoyable mode to play through, but the AI can get really brain dead at times, and this is noticeable especially on higher difficulties, where they will just hang around in stairwells or hide behind cover for minutes at a time, and just give you ample opportunity to sneak up behind them. Not even slowly sometimes. You can get right up behind these fools and just shank them. And speaking of higher difficulty, literally the only reason you would ever pick them is because they offer higher score multipliers, which means higher amounts of money. And your arbitrary beat the game at this level or higher achievement, but other than that, there's nothing to it. It's not really harder, unless you're going for active combat. All in all though, Splinter Cell Blacklist is actually a pretty decent game, minus the fact that there are some pretty hefty faults in things like character portrayal. But if you can get over that, then you've got a pretty good experience to sit through. But if you can't get over that, then just scribble out the Splinter Cell branding on the case, change the protagonist's name to Fan Sisha, and you've got a pretty good stealth game with a lot of mechanics and content to play around with and work through. And as a little side tangent here, if we are at the stage where Michael Ironside cannot reprise his role as the voice actor of Sam Fisher, I think we have a pretty good alternative on the table. We could continue the story of 4th Echelon in the Splinter Cell universe with Briggs. He's already established himself as a pretty competent Splinter Cell agent, albeit with a little bit to learn, but with Grimsdaughter acting as some kind of senior staff mentor figure, giving him advice from all of the adventures she's had guiding Sam, we could also have Charlie return acting as his Grimdaughter, feeding him information, blueprints, schematics and whatnot. We could also have Coben return, who's now reformed from his arms dealer days and acts more as a William Redding to Briggs, giving him the better recommendations for specific loadout builds, explaining how certain weaponry and gadgets work. I mean, he's just the best character, so he deserves more screen time. At the end of the day, regardless if you're here for the stealth, for the combat, for the story, for the characters, Splinter Cell is a series that has been going on for nearly 20 years now and is beloved worldwide by millions of fans. And with a remake of the first game being set to release next year, there's a very strong likelihood that if that game sells well enough, we could get all new entries in the Splinter Cell storyline. And I think I can speak for any Splinter Cell fan that we openly welcome any chance we can get to execute the fifth freedom. Thank you all so much for watching. We are finally at the end of the trilogy of reviews based on games I thought were underrated. And if you were someone who came to this channel for the reviews, only to get blueballed for about a year and a half, with nothing but news, leaks, and let's plays, I am genuinely sorry for that. But I'm back in the swing of things now, and I already have my next review planned out, and as soon as I'm done editing this one, I'm going to be making a start on it. Now, I ain't going to reveal what it is. I will give you a clue in that this is a video I spoke about doing well over a year ago. It's one that has been on my mind for the last 2 months, and I'm finally going to be getting to it. So keep an eye out for that one in the future. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.